Right, good afternoon, members. It's just gone 2 o'clock, so and we have enough members to be quorum, so I think I will convene our Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee meeting for this afternoon, Monday the 16th December. I shall run through our normal protocols. Firstly, to remind you that we don't have any fire alarms scheduled for this afternoon. And it's dry out there at the moment, so in the event that there is an alarm, it'll be real, and we will need to our way out in an orderly fashion and congregate in the entrance to War Memorial Park. Also to remind you that the meeting is being webcast. I have apologies from Councillor Parker and also from Councillor Mitchell, who is running late, but aims to be with us. Aims to be with us before we close. Excuse me, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. May I give apologies for probably about 3:25, 3:20 if the meeting continues that long, because we're having the Eli Lilly pre-app this afternoon. There is a clash of meetings.
And in advance, if we're still going at 3:30, I apologise, because I want on a one-item paper. But then, help me with this, members, let's try and get crack on. Yeah. Councillor Keating.
I just apologise for being a few moments late. Thank you.
No worries at all. We just started, so... I don't have any resignations and replacements. No. Okay. Declarations or conflict of interest. No hands gone up. Okay. I don't have any urgent items on the agenda, so that takes us to paper A, confirm the minutes. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. On page 5 of 15, 45/13, I wanted to just pick up a point with you, Chair, if I may, and forgive me for this, but this is the most appropriate point to do it on, and to be respectful of yourself as the Chair and of the committee as the parent body of the Constitutional Working Party. I wanted to raise with you the Labour Group's concerns about this process, and in particular about the debate and discussions taking place in Constitutional Working Party around scrutiny. They are very serious concerns that the Labour Group has, and about the possible continuation of that Constitutional Working Party were these issues not to be appropriately resolved. To be respectful to the parent committee, and to be respectful of you, the Chair, I thought I should raise that here, because there is a Constitutional Working Party tomorrow evening where we will be raising these issues, and they are of such significance for us as a group. We thought it appropriate to mention it in terms of the minutes here, but also to raise it with you as the committee.
Yes, that's duly noted, and perhaps you can just pick up some of the trend of that outside of this meeting, just to be forewarned. Okay. Yeah, that's very helpful, thank you. Councillor Leake.
I'm not aware that the document, the report, which I asked should be circulated to others because I thought it was so useful, has actually been circulated. Namely, the report on the Section 106. We advised, and indeed do recall, that we've had one that explained certain aspects of Section 106, but the actual report, which I thought should go out, has not, as far as I know, gone out. Is that correct? Yeah, I've got that. Sorry, I'm referring to the minutes, which says that the officer's report and the committee's recommendations should be circulated. And I don't think it was. Is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding was we had the requests. The actual report that came to this committee had a useful table in that, an explanation of both existing Section 106 monies and future SIL funding, and that's the report we wanted circulated to all members. So I don't believe that's happened yet, so we will ensure that happens subsequent to this meeting. Thank you for that. Yes, thank you. Yes, the additional information also from officers sent out on the 13th, that was helpful, and that also needs to accompany it. Yeah. Any other comments, members, on the minutes? Then I will agree those on your behalf. I'd like you to agree with me that I can agree them, though.
Yes,
yes, thank you. That takes us to... Oh, I lost my place. Just quickly... because we've got such little paperwork, yes, you keep flicking past it, yeah. Item 8, member and public participation. I am notified of none. We have nothing from the relevant portfolio holder currently. We have no referrals from other committees or any issues referred by Cabinet. That takes us to item 12, and we as a committee are requested to note that since the last meeting of Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee, there have been no requests or authorisations granted under the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act 2000 for either directed surveillance or covert human intelligence source. Okay. Yes, Councillor Keating.
Just one question. I sometimes get worried that we're not necessarily asking the right question. Does this actually encompass the whole range of possible investigatory powers? Please, thank you.
Get the right. I've got the right one. Yes, it does for RIPA. So anything that we used under RIPA would come back in.
Thank you, that's helpful. Any other questions on where we're up to so far? Nope. That then takes us to item 13 on the agenda, our substantive paper B regarding indemnities for members and officers. Councillor Keating. This matter was referred from Council, and my understanding was because there were questions that were required to be asked, which it was felt to be more appropriate to be dealt with at committee before going back then as a recommendation or not to full Council. The report itself is quite short and succinct. So before considering the matter for recommendation, do we have any questions? Okay. Councillor Leake.
Yes, paragraph 3.1, this report accords with the Council's policy and budget framework and supports the development of an effective and efficient Council. I don't recall ever reading about it in the policy and budget framework, and I'm not quite sure how it has an impact on the effective and efficient running of this Council. So I'd like an officer to explain that to me. And I think I've got a second question, but yes, in 5, options analysis, it suddenly drops the combination of member and officer and just refers to officer, and I wondered whether there was something that I should read into that. And more particularly, I want to know how much this is going to cost, because I've been a member now for nearly 14 years, and I don't recall anybody having a problem, and it just seems like a potential large bill for very little benefit. Thank you.
Would you like to take those 3? Thank you. If you can put your mic up.
Apologies. The first point, in terms of paragraph 3.1, when I say it accords with the budget and policy framework, it actually, there's nothing in it that jars with budget and policy framework. I understand this is a standard that the Council have in place, so I can only comment on that. In terms of, however, supporting effective and efficient working, I think it does, actually, because if you are a member or an officer, and part of your role is to deal with issues that may expose you to potential personal risk, having the benefit of an indemnity in place actually gives you some comfort and support in carrying out your role, particularly as a member on outside bodies. And I think it will help encourage members to feel more secure in undertaking that role. And having been in authorities actually where members have had action taken against them or for work on outside bodies that they've done, and also for officers who've been subject to personal prosecution, both of which came to naught, both of which cause significant stress to the individuals, including financial stress, I think at that point having an undertaking which is expressly there in place at the time brought significant assurance and resilience to that process. So actually I do believe it supports an efficient and effective council. In terms of the reference to officers, I think that's just an omission because it's officers or members.
Sorry, if we just pop the light off a minute. And...
So,
I do think it needs to be changed then, because it's very specifically members and officers in every single paragraph, and it just lapses into officers.
yeah, we can make that change. And in terms of the cost of this, my understanding is, and Kevin will give more detail on this, but the understanding is that you already have insurance cover in place, but Kevin will no doubt pick up on that element.
Thank you, Chair. That's basically what I was going to say. Largely, we've got the current insurance premiums cover the majority of the types of indemnity that's being referenced here. So I'm not expecting it to be a large additional cost.
Tell me how much then. I mean, what's large to you and what's small to me, or vice versa?
Chair, all I can say is the current indemnity costs for officer indemnities and liability and defamation, the current premium costs for all of that at the moment, and the areas that are covered in paras 414 to 418, the elements that are currently covered is about £10,500 is the annual premium for all members and officers. And that's already in the budget, and that's already part of the council's budgeting.
I mean, is that? Do you mean that's in because we are proposing this, so it's in next year's budget, or has that been running for years? And if it has, why do we need this new policy?
Those particular elements of the insurance cover have been running for a number of years, and they're already in the insurance policy, so that's not an additional cost. I was trying to give you a quantum of what the current premium costs are, and there are some elements that are not covered at the moment or may not be coverable by insurance, and those would be directly fundable if they occurred by the council. But again, we've never had issues where there has been that type of claim and a cost that would have fallen on the council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. 414 on 11 of 15. Just looking at the bullet points there, one of the questions I had really surrounded the first and last bullet point of trying to understand, obviously, the extension of cover. It really picks up where Council League left off, really, in terms of, what are we getting extra for this, and why is it the case? I'm rather concerned to hear, elections extends to cover of returning officer for personal liabilities. I would like to understand what that actually is. If we haven't had it previously, why haven't we had it, and why do we need it now? And then finally, 2A(5), the idea of extending cover to employees and members, and is this acting in reasonable belief that their actions were within the legal powers of the business or authorised legal power of employee or member? Is this ultra-virus bit? Again, why didn't we have it? And if we've not got it, why? It's just a question of seeing where it's come from. But also, a lot's happened recently, and I just got the feeling that this was, closing the door after the horse has bolted, so to speak, considering an awful lot of what's happened and gone on. I just want to understand it a little bit more. I much appreciate your help.
Can I perhaps do a little bit of an intro, because that might explain why you have got this paper at this time. In 2004, the government sought to clarify the situation relating to indemnities for members and officers. Indemnities have always been available for members and officers under it's always been argued that they're available under incidental powers in section 111 of the Local Government Act, and the government clarified the situation in 2004. And at that point, lots of authorities basically picked the issue up and said to members, would you like the opportunity to put an overarching indemnity in place because the last thing, to be frank, you want is when an issue comes up, the last thing you want is a report going at that time to pick it up. So it's one of those things where good governance is made not in the heat of the situation, but before the situation. And so it's in place so that particular aspect of the problem doesn't get reviewed at that time. So lots of authorities did that around 2004 onwards. It would be a little bit later. When I came to the authority, there was another issue completely unrelated. It was contractual position that the council were dealing with, and as part of that contractual issue, which has since went away, there was an issue about indemnity for the person who was going to sign, the officer who was going to sign that particular agreement. I simply raised the question, well, this order came out in 2004. Did members consider it at that time? Would they like to consider it again? And it is simply on the back of that, I asked SLT, I asked the Chief Exec. At this stage, I think I'd been in the organisation probably 3 weeks, and I simply said, was it done at that time? And we don't think it was. So I just thought, right, well, I'll put it together and just ask the question, would you like to have an indemnity in place? The reason for that is because when you do have actions against members and officers, to pick it up and try and run it through the system at that stage, it's quite time consuming, and the individual who's at the centre of the storm actually goes through quite a difficult time where they're funding things and they don't know if they're going to get paid for them, or not funding things because they don't know whether they're going to get an indemnity. And also B, it, to be frank, takes out the P with the small p, the politics of it in terms of looking at the individual. So it's a blanket indemnity that has certain restrictions, and it's about the issue, not the person. And so that's why authorities that have indemnities in place tend to have this kind of thing in place done beforehand. Now, I think the point was made, well, this has never come across, this has never been an issue. And that's absolutely right. It's a very rare instance. When it does apply, when it does happen, however, for that individual who's at the centre of the storm, and indeed usually for the council as well, because it's usually not just the individual, but usually action can be taken against the council, ancillary action against the council. It's quite a difficult place to be, and it usually originates from their workplace. If I can give a recent example, a number of fire officers recently, in the last probably 18 months, firemen went into a building, a number of people died, HSE came in and for the first time ever prosecuted the firemen at the front of the queue. So not the fire authority, not the chief fire officer, the firemen, and this was absolutely new. So to find yourself as a normal fire officer suddenly engaging with the HSE in a prosecution because there was an indemnity in place at that time, the organisation were able to organise their legal resource around them and support that officer, and the effect of that, to be frank, was that the HSE lost the case and lost the issue, and costs were applied for. Had that not been the case, the fire officers concerned, apart from it being extremely stressful, might have felt, well, I can't actually support these costs, and basically, where would justice be? So that's an example of it. But the point about this is to bring this in place and have it on the books in case. But it's one of those things that's very, very rare, and it's just I wouldn't say a formality, but it's just an element of governance that's useful to have in place if members wish it. And I think the point that Kevin was making with the insurance was, in truth, they've already got a certain amount of insurance already overlaid, so the costs, the additional costs, are not necessarily great. I'll stop now, and that was supposed to be a premise before Kevin gave you further information.
I think Councillor Harvey would like to come back a second.
Thank you, Chair. I really appreciate that. I do genuinely appreciate the explanation, because I'm trying to understand it from that perspective, and looking at the back page on 15 of 15 with little 6. It's just this notion of what the indemnity covers, and then where the examination of responsibility and the examination of accountability lie in the process. And it's just understanding where the balance is on that, really. Of course, we want to protect and we want to provide appropriate insurance and cover, but it's also the balance of that. If there was something that was done that was of a disciplinary nature, then where does that kick in, such that, for example, you wouldn't offer indemnity because it was... But if you'll hear it's the wording that the individual must admit their liability, well, not everyone's going to admit their liability, are they? And so there's a relationship here. I just want to try and understand between that side of it.
Basically, there are some things that the indemnity won't cover. So where basically there's a plea of guilty to criminal actions, it won't cover that. It won't stop disciplinary action anyway. So it's not, you know, if you're doing this, we don't discipline you. And if somebody protests their innocence and are supported and are subsequently found to be guilty, unless they appeal and are subsequently exonerated, the costs will be either clawed back, or what normally happens, to be honest, what normally happens is that the legal team supporting that individual, the authority enters into a conditional agreement with them and the officer. So basically the solicitor who is supporting and the barrister who is supporting the officer enters into an agreement which says if he wins, the authority pays; if he loses, he pays. So that's the kind of basis that you look at. So in terms of circumstances where an indemnity wouldn't apply, at 4.9, it's criminal acts where they've been found guilty, other intentional wrongdoing, again where there was a recklessness or you know, willful disregard, any fraud, or defamation, not where they're defending defamation, but where they're actually commencing proceedings.
No, thank you, because again, what I was trying to get in my head was how to, and I guess it's the legalese of all of this, and of course it is what is recklessness against somebody's reasonable belief that their actions were within the legal power of the authority, and it's that balance between the two of those. I think you've explained it, and I'm comfortable with it, but I think it's going to be one of those things of testing to see. The issue with the elections, though, that was a concern, because we've obviously just recently turned over our elections team with new members of staff and obviously a new elections officer. And to think that they weren't covered for personal liabilities previously was a surprise. That completely took me.
Thanks, Sharp. The section 414 is some of the quotes from the existing policy. So that's not new. That's not new. So that's to say that the existing policy and particularly because a lot of this is about referencing outside bodies, particularly with the outside entity contingency cover, covers those elements. So it was to pick up and say, to reiterate the point that a lot of this indemnity is already insured for within those particular aspects. And on the particular question, Councillor Harvey, on the returning officer, I think Council approved a separate indemnity recently around this issue for the returning officer.
Councillor Watts.
In case there's any doubt of the benefit of this, I'll just mention that I'm a representative on an outside body, Whitchurch Silk Mill Trust, and for the past 2 years I've had an extraordinary series of events where the trustees as a whole have been threatened that if they don't take certain line of action, then they would incur large costs. It's got very, very personal to me, because it was said that well, first of all, it was said that my term of office as this council's representative had lapsed, even though I've been reappointed. But it was, the threat was that I would personally be liable for costs as how I acted. I acted throughout on advice from officers of the council up to a point, and I'll come back to that, and had benefited from the advice of the legal officer at the Hampshire Buildings Preservation Trust, and his advice was given particular attention by the judge in an emergency employment tribunal. I know that one of our assailants has worked the room at meetings of other politicians, let's say, saying that the trustees were going to have to incur personal liabilities, and one of the trustees was present at that meeting and thus threatened. And all the way through, of course, we ended up with some wonderful pro bono solicitors as well. We were being advised that the opposition had no leg to stand on.
Yeah, Councillor Watts, I hesitate to interrupt you, but I must caution you against being too specific of a particular incident. If you can speak more generally about your experiences, that would be helpful.
Well, I've really come to the end of that. What I'm saying is that it would have been a whole lot easier had we known that an indemnity was in place. Although we accepted the advice throughout that what we were doing was the right thing, and indeed a lot of what we were doing was as a result of that advice. There was one point, and this is specific to the council and not directly relevant to this. As the council was one of the founder members, and I was just representing a founder member, I thought that the founder member itself should be getting involved legally. I was told that the way legal services operate here, that before a legal officer could get involved in something, there'd have to be a budget for it. And in this particular case, the department didn't have any budget for legal services, so they couldn't get involved. I don't think that's very good.
I think that's a helpful illustration, but not necessarily a helpful reflection on. I'm sure legal services don't work that way. Councillor Keating.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, on the back of the discussion we just had, identify that I anticipate that there would be a difficulty in members on outside bodies, because when you arrive at on the first occasion at the outside body as a nominated member, you are reminded immediately, certainly on well-run outside bodies, that your responsibilities are to the body that you've just joined, not to the borough council. Now, if the insurance continues to operate in those circumstances, then I would welcome it, and if it doesn't, I would welcome clarification. But that's the only issue I had, because I originally put my hand up to refer to the change of returning officer and the need for the returning officer's insurance to be sorted out. Thank you.
First thing is, lots of outside bodies actually do provide insurance and indemnities themselves. But the second thing is that where they didn't, yes, we would cover that, provided it met the criteria of, no fraud and things like that.
Councillor Gardner.
Thank you. Just picking up 414, last bullet point, where it refers to but not volunteers. What's the situation for a non-member who is appointed by this council to an outside body? I'm sorry, I'm looking at 414, the last line of the last bullet point, where it refers to but not volunteers, and that triggered the question, what happens to members of staff or non-council members who are appointed to outside bodies?
I don't think this covers non-employees or non-members. Certainly the indemnity doesn't. It does cover independent members so members who are not elected members but are nonetheless members, which actually would not be the case. Yeah, wouldn't be the case here, but in some organisations they have co-opted members. All right, okay. So it would cover those if you were a co-opted member, but it wouldn't cover a volunteer who was put on an outside body who didn't have that status. So if you have someone, and I don't know if you do, who was neither an employee nor a member, but was put on an outside body, the way it stands at the moment, they wouldn't be covered. So do you have people in that?
Yes, we do, and I am. I am appointed to one outside body in my own right, not as a member, not by this council.
It wouldn't cover you in that situation. It only covers people if the council is nominating somebody to an outside body who's not a member or an officer, that it still wouldn't cover that person. And if we do have people in that, we do, then perhaps, to be honest, that is something that we need to go away and look at, both in terms of insurance and in terms of, I think there is a limitation, and to be honest I'll just need to check, but off memory I think there's a limitation within the order itself, within the order, about it being limited to members and officers, but I will check, and if it doesn't, if it doesn't have that limitation, I'll extend it to volunteers if that is the wish of members.
If I can just come back. Actually, I was in that position because when I came off the council in 2008, I was appointed by this council to the body that I had previously been on as a member.
An unnecessary detail at the moment, Councillor Keating, but I appreciate your thought. Councillor Watts.
Just arising on something that's been said, one of the allegations, or the root cause of the allegation I was talking about, was that I wasn't indeed a trustee because this council had not validly nominated me. So therefore the indemnity of me as a councillor, I think, would have been reassurance.
Right, I don't have any more questions, Matt. Councillor Kubert.
On the volunteer issue, I think if you left it as volunteer, it would be too wide. So I think the best way is, because there aren't many instances where we have non-members who are represented, that we put in a methodology which co-opts them, so that we don't have a blanket definition of volunteer, which then becomes a very grey area. We just change the way we formalise those representing us, but who are neither officers nor members. And I think that would be more sensible, probably.
Okay, thank you. What I'm getting from the series of questions, that we started from a position of being not quite sure why we needed this cover and whether or not it had been there in the past or whether it had been exposed, and I think it's been helpful to have the series of questions and answers that assure us that we have had previous cover. However, there are gaps, and this paper seeks to cover those gaps. I also then hear that, particularly with the last point about volunteers or acting on outside bodies, that there's potentially a further gap that we would want considered within this paper and process of indemnities. And yes, it's maybe at the margins, but nonetheless it's something that we need to consider. It is open for you to have a debate about this issue. However, I wonder whether in suggesting that the paper is taken forward, and we'll have a decision at the moment on whether we recommend it going forward, I can understand why the paper is referred back to this committee, because to try and have these conversations in full council would be almost impossible. However, it does seem helpful to almost have some illustrations within this paper if it goes to council, based on some of the conversations and questions we've asked. And if it is just an illustration around what it does cover and what it doesn't cover, that might help to facilitate its progress at next stage. I see Councillor Keating and Councillor Kubert want to come back quickly with something. Councillor Keating.
Very briefly, Chair, I think if we adopt the phraseology council-nominated volunteers, we'll be doing sufficient for the purposes of this insurance policy, and we could separately take up the process that Councillor Cubitt refers to of changing the mechanism by which we select volunteers. So we cover volunteers by using the phraseology I suggested now, get the insurance policy sorted out, and we could then change our own internal machinery for the process of getting volunteers.
Yeah, Councillor Cubitt.
Yes, I apologise for being late, and this might have been covered in the early bit of the questioning, but it just seems to me that instead of having our existing insurance and then going out and getting additional insurance, that we just need our broker to renegotiate the terms of the original insurance to ensure that it incorporates these aspects which Anne has identified as being omitted at this juncture on our insurance policy. Because the very last thing we need is for there to be two insurance policies, because we all know what happens then is that neither will pay out because each will say that it belongs to the other. So, I mean, it's interesting to have this put forward. I would hate for us to have something that other councils do not have. And I would hate for there to be two insurance policies when actually we just need a broker to go out and negotiate a better underwriting.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that's recommendation 2.2 is to authorise me to do that. In fact, it wouldn't be the case of looking to get two insurance policies. It would be looking to see how the existing insurance policy could be appropriately amended where possible. But the report does highlight the fact that there may be elements of the indemnity that you cannot get insurance for, or it wouldn't be cost effective to get insurance for. So that's the piece of work that would need to follow up on the basis of the discussion we had earlier, that the vast majority of the elements in the indemnity is already in the insurance cover the council's got.
As a follow-up, I would have very big problems if it transpires through the underwriting and the broking negotiations that there's an element that Anne suggested here we need that would be so prohibitively expensive. It would suggest to me that it's not off the shelf, so it's abnormal, and that comes back to Councillor Harvey's original questions, because you've told us that this is normal. And if it's prohibitively expensive, it's absolutely not normal, because what it tells me straight away is that this is an over-the-counter, not an off-the-shelf. And I would certainly not want our council to be going for a gold-plated insurance policy that was prohibitively expensive, and that was not something that is sought by other councils.
Pick up two things actually. First thing is that lots of councils will have an insurance cover, and then they may decide to self-insure on the basis that for any other cover that they decide not to put in the insurance, and they very much leave it, to be honest, to their Section 151 and the market when they're doing those discussions, because of the very slim likelihood of this actually happening. So it's a judgment call in terms of, well, what's the likely cost going to be, because very much usually the cost is minimal on top of the insurance you normally need. I can come back though in relation to the issue of volunteers, because just while people were talking, I have actually retained my order with me, and it is limited to members and officers. So it wouldn't necessarily apply to a volunteer unless we went through a process of making them members, and I'd have to check that out. I'd have to check what we did in relations.
Thank you, Anne. I mean, I don't think we need to focus too much on volunteers, because that's such a side issue. The central issue is, are we doing what the norm is? And I'm certainly not prepared in audit and governance, and my capacity as a member, to okay Kevin to go out and seek prohibitively expensive, over-the-counter, tailor-made product when I can't see any obvious reason why we should be seeking something more than anyone else. And if it means that we live with our current indemnity insurance, I think that's absolutely normal and totally acceptable. And so I would like the Section 151 officer to come back to us if it transpires that this extra cost is going to be an 80% increase on our indemnity insurance, because that would tell us immediately, as opposed to a 1% increase, that we're looking for something that not everyone else gets.
Yeah, and in fairness, we did have a bit of a discussion earlier on about sort of likely costs and additional costs of this, which I think the the general sense of the committee was that we wouldn't expect to see a huge incremental cost rise as a result of this. Councillor Gardner, perhaps you can bring us to a close, maybe.
Well, just picking up on Councillor Cubitt's point, I think it would be ridiculous if members appointed to an outside body were covered by the insurance, but if we appoint a non-member to the same outside body, they're not. So I think that ought to be looked at. It's not a matter of making them members. It might be a matter of trying to make them officers. But there is a situation there where we do take people, sometimes ex-councillors, sometimes independent people, to sit on these bodies on our behalf, and they should be covered.
Okay, so on the basis that we're going to, well, that the illustrations we've had today have been helpful, that we're going to make sure the paper consistently refers to officers and members throughout. I'm getting the sense that we are content to recommend this, provided that it doesn't lead to a significant cost increase. Councillor Leake.
I'm not happy with the form of the indemnity because it's poorly drafted, and I was hoping to give comments on that.
If you have some helpful comments to aid clarity, I think that will be...
All my comments are always helpful.
Of course they are. Sorry,
so,
Councillor Leake. I didn't mean to indicate otherwise.
Thank you. Because I can't bear sloppy drafting, and I'm afraid this is full of sloppy drafting. On item 1, we are going to clearly need, in the light of the recent discussion, an amendment to including independent members. So that is the... Sorry?
Members.
I thought we'd agreed. I mean, I don't like the members including independent members. To me means Mrs. Cubitt, Councillor West, and 2 others. And so I don't like the independent members. I really do think it would be council appointed independent members. It has to be something other than independent members, because that means to us or whatever, or non-card carrying members of the Labour or Liberal groups or whatever.
Hang on, members, let's not get out of hand. I take the point, and I'm sure we can redraft something accordingly.
Thank you. Paragraph 2.3 does not make sense at the moment. The commas are in the wrong place. Where and the final that on the next page should be a small t, not a large t. So, where any member or officer avails him, herself, of this indemnity in respect of defending him, herself against any criminal proceedings, I don't think we need the next comma, because if we did, we'd need another one after proceedings. 2.3. Commas always come in pairs, so you can have him, herself against any criminal proceedings. You've got a comma, you either delete it or put in... I would just delete it, or defamation proceedings. The indemnity is subject to a condition that, if, in respect of the matter in relation to which the member or officer has made use of this indemnity, the condition, I think we've got 2 that. So it needs a lawyer to look at it, but it isn't right. And the second that, after little b, should be a small t, because it is that relating to the condition. Sorry, you're looking at me as though I'm...
No, that's...
If we don't have careful drafting, this will be
Yep.
meaningless and useless, frankly.
Yep, I've got that one, the small b. And the next
And
one?
323, where the authority has specifically approved such appointment as such, a member or officer of that organisation for the purposes of these indemnities, full stop. What does that mean? In consequence of his or her appointment as such member or officer of that organisation by the authority, or I don't, doesn't make any... Councillor Harvey's bright, he'll... What?
And was there anything after that one, or was that it? No. Okay.
And item 6, after the word council, we need a comma.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure we can incorporate those changes and make it more explicit. So on the basis of our comments and illustrations, our wish to keep the costs down and ensure that we find some appropriate cover for council nominated volunteers, are we happy to recommend this to council? Look, no, council.
No, I'm not, because I want that. Sorry, I do apologise, but it's the cost that will tell us whether it's over the counter or off the shelf. And not too expensive means absolutely nothing to me. I want to know what the percentage increase is and the flat figure.
So that's the information you need in order for us to put it before full council. Okay, I've now got Councillor Leake and Councillor Gardner.
Of course, if Councillor Cubitt had been here at the beginning, I should have realised that was my sole interest in the whole discussion. But I agree with her entirely. The cost has to be a major part of the equation. Frankly, I wouldn't be wasting my time on this. But certainly the cost is a very important element to me.
Right, Councillor Gardner.
I would like to know, before this paper is referred to council, whether the points we've raised this afternoon are now covered, in particular the issue of council nominated non-members to outside bodies.
Okay, so can I suggest that the action is to respond to the notes or respond to the comments from this committee to this committee, and if all of the matters can be resolved outside of the committee through that response, fine. If not, then we bring it back to a further committee before it recommended to council. So there's a conditional recommendation subject to us having those issues resolved. Okay? You happy with that, members? Yep. Right. Thank you.